The smell of well-seasoned pork chops was in the air. I could hear the sizzle of the pan as my mother placed another pork chop into the hot grease. "Come on, y'all, it's time to eat," my mother called my brother, my sister, and I down into the kitchen. She made our plates. She spooned on the rice. She spooned on the corn and a hot pork chop for each plate. She handed my brother and my sister their plates, and I, being the eldest, she made my plate last. After she put on the pork chop, she spooned on the rice and she spooned on the corn. I noticed that there was no more food left. Puzzled, I looked at my mother and I asked her, "Aren't you hungry? Aren't you gonna eat?" And she said to me, "I'm not hungry." She picked up the cigarette that was in the ashtray. She took a long draw of the cigarette. The puff of smoke came out of her mouth in a long line. And she looked at me and said, "I'm just gonna smoke this cigarette." When that happened, I was about 12 years old. That was the first time the epiphany came to me of something that I call a power of deserving. I realized at that moment in my life that I felt like when I had my kids, I wanted to eat too. I deserved to eat just like my kids deserve to eat. And from then on, the path of excellence that I've been on has been just that, just because I knew that I deserved to have a different type of lifestyle. I grew up in the inner city of Cleveland, where violence and crime was all around me. My mother was a young single mother. She had me when she was 16. She had my brother when she was 17. And then she had my sister when she was 20. Teenage pregnancy was the norm. Everybody was in survival mode. My mother was in survival mode. My father was an inconsistent part of our lives. He spent 15 years in prison. He suffered from alcoholism and drug abuse. And so we were left to fend for ourselves. Most people in the inner city, most people growing up in poverty, are on survival mode. Survival is a byproduct of fear of lack, a consistent fear of lack. When you have a feeling of deserving, it can't live in the same space as fear. Deserving is the same thing as a feeling of worthiness. Both worthiness and deserving are birthed from the idea of love. I am a first generation student, meaning that I'm the first person in my family to go to college. Unfortunately, I'm still the only person in my family to get a college degree. When you're first generation, there's so many unknowns that you have to deal with. There's so many things that you just have no idea about. And then when I went on to college, I ended up going to Kent State University for my undergraduate degree, which is a predominantly white institution. Going to a school such as that was very intimidating for me because, again, like I said, I was the first person in my family to go to college. I had no experience. No one else had any experience. So I was going through life as a new college student on my own, figuring it out as I went. It was difficult because oftentimes I was the only Black person in my class. Being in a classroom with other people, those white rich students, I didn't feel like I deserved to be there. I didn't feel like I had a place there. This level of imposter syndrome hung over my head. However, I knew that because I had a power of deserving, because I knew that I could not go back to the impoverished lifestyle that I lived, that imposter syndrome had to take a step to the side. That imposter syndrome had to take a back seat. I knew that I had to keep going. And so I finished college. I ended up going into the fashion industry to work as a designer for several years before I realized that I actually had a calling to teach. When I got into the industry, I realized also that being in the industry was quite different than being in my inner city neighborhood. I couldn't just go in there as my normal self from the inner city of Cleveland. I had to go in there as a different person. I had to code switch in order to be able to fit in. What I didn't realize was that being in these corporate spaces, I had the right to negotiate my salary. I didn't realize until I was well into my 30s that I had the right to negotiate my salary. It took a few years even after that for me to realize that I actually deserved to negotiate my salary. And so I would be someone from the inner city coming in this new position. They would, place the offer letter in front of me saying that they would be willing to offer me $45,000 a year. And excited, I would take it without any hesitation. Whereas the person next to me, someone who maybe had a family member in the corporate space and knew what to do, that person knew to negotiate their salary, and we being in the same position, that person would make $55,000, whereas I was only making $45,000. Again, not knowing that I had the deserving to be able to ask for a negotiation in my salary. Those types of situations held me back, not only just because of the not knowing, but also because I'm a woman. Women still make less than men. And then when you put in the intersection of the fact that I'm a woman who grew up in poverty and I'm a Black woman, Black women still make about 66% less than men do. Women still make about 66% of the dollar as men, which makes another challenge. We have this idea that because we're women, we have this idea that because we grew up poor or because we're Black, that we don't deserve to negotiate our salaries. But I soon found out that that wasn't true. After I worked in the fashion industry, I began teaching. It was an amazing experience for me. I knew that teaching was my calling. And so while I was in the process of getting my PhD, I worked part-time as an assistant professor in the School of Fashion. I discovered that there was a full-time position that came open. I applied for that full-time position. I didn't end up getting it. A few months later, a second position became open. I applied for that one and I didn't get that one either. A few months later, a third position became open at the Kent State University Fashion School and I applied for that one. And for a third time, I didn't get that position. And I realized that something wasn't quite right. I decided, because I knew I had a power of deserving, I knew that I deserved to be in that space as a full-time professor. So I decided that it was time for me to file an affirmative action complaint against the School of Fashion. And when I did that in 2012, I became the very first Black professor of fashion. During that time, a huge level of imposter syndrome swept over me. I knew I was in a space where I didn't belong once more. I knew I was in a space where I wasn't welcome. And so for the first 2 years as assistant professor, that cloud of imposter syndrome was over my head. Through various forms of prayer and meditation, I was able to overcome that because I understood and I had a level of deserving that swept over me. This new power of deserving set me on fire. When I was set on fire, I began researching. I began traveling around the world talking about my research. I became the top researcher in that department. And soon, because of the job that I had been doing, I was invited to become the assistant dean for the College of the Arts. Me being on fire and me having a strong sense of deserving eventually led me to become named as one of the trailblazers for Kent State University for the service that I provided through the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Department. That sense of deserving That change from being an imposter to changing to the idea that I deserve to be in that space really helped evolve my life. Attaining the power of deserving is something that is quite simple. There's only 4 steps involved. Not to say that those steps are easy, but they're doable. The first step is a desire to make a change. When you have the desire to make a change, your whole world can evolve. Just knowing that there's a possibility to change is all worth it. Number 2, changing your environment. One of the things that helped me was the fact that I took myself out of my impoverished inner city neighborhood, which allowed me to see that there was something else available for me. I began to read various things that helped me increase my power of deserving. The things that I listened to, the things that I watched, also contributed heavily to my power of deserving. Number 3, change your social circles. It was important for me to understand that I needed to be around other people who also had a strong level of a power of deserving. When you change up the people that you're around, when you're in a space where you're with people who also have a strong power of deserving, you all can lift each other up. Number 4 is probably the most important of all of those steps, is to affirm yourself. Affirming yourself can only be done by you. You can't contribute to the society without having any affirmation of yourself. You can't depend on others to affirm you. And so those 4 steps, one more time, to attain that power of deserving is to first have a desire to want to make a change in your life. Number 2, again, is to change your environment. Number 3 is to change your social circles. And again, of course, the most important is to affirm yourself. And so I would like for you to repeat after me. You can either say it out loud, or you can either say it in your spirit. These are just a few affirmations that I say to myself every day to help me to continue to develop that power of deserving. I am special and I deserve to have a good life. I am talented and I deserve the opportunity to allow my talents to guide me to my dreams. I'm a wonderful person and I deserve to have wonderful people in my life. My ancestors fought to leave me a legacy, and therefore I deserve to live a life free of discrimination. My power of deserving will provide me limitless opportunities to change my life and the lives of others. If you feel as though you don't have a power of deserving, if you didn't even know that you had the power to want to deserve a better life, then I challenge you today. I challenge you to go through those 4 steps that I mentioned, to think about what your life might look like if you had a power of deserving, what your circle of friends might look like, what your environment might look like, how you can continue to affirm yourself. I challenge you, gain your power of deserving and watch your life changed. It changed my life more than what I could have ever dreamed my life could have been. And having a power of deserving can also change your life as well. Thank you.